morning. Hello and welcome.
Hi, Elizabeth. Nice
Hi.
to see you.
Nice to see you too, Tom. I'm really excited that you're going to be part of our RCIRCLE Talks to round. You know, I couldn't use the word circle twice because otherwise that would just be redundant.
These are the challenges of a good facilitator and interviewer, right?
Yeah, they are. They are. Well, hi everybody. I'm Elizabeth Lembke. I am a co-host on the RCIRCLE channel. I am also a chief talent navigator at Transforming Talent, and I'm highly honored to have one of my oldest friends in Germany when it comes to organizational transformation. We met 2008 in the middle of Black Forest on a field somewhere, and did a lot of and I learned what transformation work could really look like. I'm here together with, of course, Tom Klein. So hello, Tom.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, and I'm excited to talk about organizational transformation because a lot of the talks that have been on RCIRCLE thus far have really been in regards to recruiting, in regards to diversity and inclusion. And, you know, as RCIRCLE, we want to really be a community for talking about things that have in regards to talent, in regards to organizational development, in essence, anything to do with people at work. And so as we bridge the very first organizational transformation, so congratulations on that one, Tom.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor.
Exactly. So it's an honor I'll remember for as long as I can. So if anybody remembers Julie Brown, they'll get that quote. So Tom, as one of my oldest friends, I'm going to let you introduce yourself as to who you are and what you're up to, and then we'll dive right in as to organizational transformation. So
Well, thank you.
man.
So I am a German Canadian, so I speak English because I was born in Canada. Spent the first 30 years of my life there. I went to university for 10 years and was teaching there, doing psychology and politics and philosophy and the history of ideas as a TA. And then I came to Germany to finish my doctorate and decided I didn't want to be an academic and I wanted to go into business instead. So I started this long path of being self-employed and trying to figure out what it means to apply my skills in a business context. And that has worked out quite well. So where I have landed is doing organizational development, transformational coaching, kind of deep psychologically based coaching, with a strong background in psychology, and doing a lot of work in Agile and in innovation. And so, yeah, that's what we want to talk about today, I guess.
Yeah. It's so rich because you know, I can just like hack into like 2 to 3 things that you said. You know, here studying the history of ideas, philosophy, psychology, and politics, and then taking those skills and then putting them into business. That's what I want to talk to you about. The second thing, you know, here around organizational transformation and Agile. I was, you know, and as we were talking before, you were one of the first people that I knew who was really talking about Agile in terms of agility, talking about what are the principles behind what we're doing, and not just looking at it as a methodology, but really saying, okay, how do we use this to transform organizations by coming together? You know, I don't want to say first principles, but at the end of the day, I think that that's, you know, something which you really drove home with me around the why are we doing it? What do we get if it looks good? And how will we recognize that?
Well, I actually think you can only do this work well if you are a philosopher, ultimately, because you work from first principles. So anything that we show on a methodological level is going to have a limited kind of half-life. Because we see it, we think it's interesting, we try it out, then it becomes a buzzword. And, you know, in many of the companies that I began working with Agile with, they can't hear the word Agile anymore. They don't want to hear it anymore because it's all been, you know, said too often and it hasn't been done well. And it's the same thing that happened with Lean, which I worked with strongly in the zeros for about 10 years. And we had the same effect. So what I think I've learned is that it's important to work with people on what the basic ideas are that you're trying to communicate and implement, and then to find ways of doing that. And then you can apply whatever method happens to work for you
Yeah.
that goes together with those kinds of principles.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's this, the assumption that people then get with whatever that shiny penny buzzword has oftentimes not a lot to do with the original ideas as to what were these, you know, we talk about lean, talk about agile, is what they were trying to accomplish. And you get distracted at some point by the language or the buzzwords and the associations people have around that particular thing, rather than, like you said, going back to the ideas of what are we trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So can you give me a little bit of insight, because I couldn't agree with that statement more, around how you've gotten back to that kind of simplicity of what are we doing it for, and what are we hoping to get out of it? How have you worked with that?
Well, there are a couple of basic principles of business that you can always reconnect with. One is business is not about making money.
Mm-hmm.
I love telling people this again and again, especially finance people, because you know, most companies orient to financial goals.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you don't make money, you're not going to survive. But I like Peter Drucker's statement, business, the only legitimate purpose of a business is winning customers.
Mm-hmm.
And money is a hygiene factor. So it's what proves that you've done a good job after the fact, but it's a lagging indicator. And so what I try to do is to interrupt a lot of the basic assumptions that people are working in a business
Mm-hmm.
to focus on what matters and what's actually going to get you to be successful. And so that's the first.
Yeah.
The second is that I like Yuval Harari's take on this.
Mm-hmm.
We are successful as we are as a species, because we have learned to cooperate flexibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, you know, if we're serving customers, we're trying to create value, and our job is to cooperate flexibly to fulfill that purpose. And anything that helps us to do that kind of cooperation, to collaborate effectively, is going to be, you know, what we want to look for. Now, what I then do is to look at a lot of the ways that we organize and especially control ourselves in business. And what we see is that they make us inflexible and create internal competition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that kind of goes counter to the purpose of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So what we want is an organization which is highly focused on customer needs, which is great at innovation, which cooperates well, but not in a rigid sense of fixed processes, for example, but is able to question its own processes and to develop new processes and new behaviors and culture according to the demands of what they're doing. And if you just take those two things as basic principles, you can already begin to apply levers to a whole host of things inside the organization, which are not helping you towards
Yes.
those kinds of fulfilling those kinds of purposes.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I call it like 80s-itis.
80s-itis? What's that?
80s-itis is this assumption that Gordon Gecko from Wall Street and his philosophy of it's just business and get it done and really about making money, that 80s-itis is actually inhibiting and prohibiting really great flexible collaboration where people are going towards a common goal, and rather than looking at my silo or my fiefdom has to win, and what happens to the others doesn't really matter. And so breaking against that Gordon Gecko philosophy.
Well, if I remember the movie properly, there were people who thought this was over the top when they were making the movie, and were horrified to discover that business school students were actually taking this as a role model for how they could be successful in business. And those are, from what I've understood, among the people who crashed the economy in the Great Recession, because that's exactly what they did. So in a sense, the economy helped to regulate itself. It kind of, you know, fixed itself again because those kinds of behaviors were not rewarded. It just had a huge, huge price. And the question is whether we have to do that kind of learning process if you understand some basic philosophical principles about, you know, what life is about. And greed, as we've known for thousands of years, is not a great principle for life. And the attempt to make it into one in particular kinds of economics did not work out all that well.
Well, and you are 100% right. And the reason that we've evolved so well as a species is this piece around collaboration, cooperation, and coordination. I'm coming back to the 3C.
Mhm.
Okay, so aside, so when I was working with Tom at one of our old original interventions, we had the 10 hoch 3, so 10 to the power, and we used 3Cs. So that was an inside joke, but at the end of the day, it does come down to how we have evolved with the 3Cs of cooperation, communication, and coordination. Really, this piece, those are the essences to be able to collaborate even well.
Linguistic anchors can be useful.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we get the philosophy, and then we get the, okay, how do we remember those basic ideas as to, what are we doing it for? Why do we exist? It's not about making money. It's this piece of, what is that value that we're actually adding? And what do we need to do to make that happen within an organization by not just focusing internally, but really having that viewpoint on what are we doing it for?
Yeah, and those kinds of linguistic anchors, for example, are part of the change process, because you can have a very high level philosophy about what the principles of what you're doing are.
Yeah.
But then you have to bring this down to the level of everyday action.
Yes.
And that's where most companies are having problems these days. So from about 2010 to 2016, I found myself in the evangelist role, where I was, most of my customers are large, medium-sized companies, mostly German, some French, some American, some British, and kind of between 1,000 and 15,000 people. And they were not very receptive in the early phases to Agile, because they had working systems. So, if you have good standard processes and good structures, and you're making money, what's the point of challenging that? And the foot in the door was always IT, because IT was moving very quickly and they were way behind. And around 2016, the penny dropped and all these companies began going, oh, Agile, we need Agile. And that's the point when I move on. I noticed, okay, now it's like when the Bild Zeitung begins making stock recommendations. The market's over. You have to go on. So the next big issue was execution. And so the idea was there, but the people in the companies didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And so then we started into things like OKRs, and we'd already been working with Agile work methodologies on a team level, but now expanding that to something like flight levels Agile, and trying to collaborate and coordinate in a stringent methodological way. That was kind of the next step. So, and for that level, you need fairly simple messages.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't get all philosophical. You have to kind of do it very, very practically. And so that's been the work for the last few years.
Well, and so let's take a look at that. So yeah, I couldn't agree more, because I think it's this piece of the grandiose ideas. When they're really not that grandiose, it's really coming down to that simplicity in terms of, okay, but what do I need to do around my own behaviors to change them, or to approach things differently? So what have you found, particularly it was, we need to challenge our processes. What are you doing? Really being that evangelical to then say, okay, and then how do we make it concrete? So what was that tipping point for you where you like you said, in the Bild Zeitung, if everyone's looking at it, then there must be something different as we continue to evolve. How did you get that sweet spot of going from the ideas to the, okay, let's use those linguistic anchors, but let's also execute? So how have you approached that, or what for you was that sweet spot?
Well, I guess it's a bit like what the book Reading the Room was based on. When you're doing transformation work, supporting people in any kind of learning process, you need to be connected to where they are at the moment. And so it's pretty straightforward. As soon as people start becoming cynical about language, and they start, the moment you mention a word like Agile, they have preconceived notions about it, and they're usually not positive because they've experienced it in ways that weren't helpful for them. Then okay, that's the point we have to focus on. And if language has already been abused, then you need new language. You just stop using it.
Yeah.
And that's where the principles become so useful, because it doesn't matter what method you use. It doesn't matter what language you're using on that level. What's important is that you're doing something which people can connect with, that
Mm-hmm.
helps them to understand and realize the basic principles. So
Yeah.
if the basic principle is the 3 C's, then, and let's say a dysfunctional application of Kanban is
Mm-hmm.
preventing people from collaborating, then just drop the Kanban and
Yeah.
do something which helps them collaborate better.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that might be something traditional.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
maybe they need clear roles
Mm-hmm.
defined. Maybe they need more siloed, discrete activities to help them to focus. And if that's what they need, then that's what you do, because it's all about the results.
Yeah.
And I guess what I've learned is that all this stuff is fluid. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
history to this.
Mm-hmm.
And something you do now will reach the limit. It'll have a half-life again.
Yeah.
And then people will have understood it, or they'll have rejected it, or they'll be curious about what the next thing is. And then you look for what the next step is that will help them to continue to collaborate and coordinate better. Right.
And I think that that's so well said, Tom, is this piece around not fixing, this, I think one of the biggest blockers is really that ability to question, is this fit for purpose anymore? And that at the end of the day, we all created the structures and organizations. If they're no longer being helpful for us, to say a quality system just looks at how well you keep to the quality processes you've described. They don't say how good your processes are. And that's your role in the organization, is to question the processes and to say, okay, what would be more helpful for us to be able to better flexibly collaborate? Are there things that, oftentimes these huge committees upon committees is not good for efficient and effective collaboration. At the same time, this piece around what are those informing? So really bringing back down to this, to say, okay, here, how do we look at the processes? And at times, yes, traditional processes can be more fruitful in terms of getting the noise out, so that the concentration on, what really actually does add value and make a difference, that the concentration can go into those areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember coming into a car part supplier a few years ago, where they had just brought in a brilliant quality manager who I knew well and who I like,
Mm-hmm.
but it tended to be a bit fundamentalist about quality process. And he had established the compliance processes, and then he went around insisting that they be done exactly as they had been described. And there were a lot of people in engineering who said, look, if we do this, we won't be able to deliver to our customers anymore. We can't. And he said, you have to. And it
Mm-hmm.
became threatening.
Yeah.
And that's where something which should enable collaboration and make quality possible starts to become dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And so we had to talk to become more flexible again.
You just said that extremely diplomatically, Tom.
Yeah. Such discussions can be friendly or not, right? Because something I really deeply believe is that coming from my psychological background, is that people always do things for good intentions.
Yeah.
And they're
Mm-hmm.
always trying to achieve something which they think is important or essential, or will contribute to their happiness or to their success. And where the problem is the strategy. So, you can have great intentions and just have dysfunctional strategies.
Yeah.
And that's one of the points at which we do coaching, or I do coaching. And that's to say, hey, look, I'm not questioning your good intentions, but what I am mirroring back to you is the consequences of the strategy that you're using to try to realize that. And that might not be working. So we need to think about different ways of approaching it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's that piece around understanding what are the resources that someone's coming into the situation with. And like I couldn't agree more, the good intentions, and how do you pick up on the intentions and say, okay, here, because the frustration, people are aware of, this is not hitting how I want it to hit. And so I think the piece that you do, and you do so well, is making the organizational transformation and then putting in the coaching and the individual and the executive coaching alongside it, because it's this coming away from how do we understand what is even in our toolkit, and understanding maybe we don't have the tools we need yet, to be able to have that impact that we're looking to have with our good intentions.
Mm. Well, if we take that point as a jumping off point,
Mm-hmm.
here I see the common ground between coaching and psychology on the one side,
Mm-hmm.
and organizational development and systems theory on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Because in both cases, we're working with organic systems. A
Yeah.
person is an organic system. You can't determine or control a person without causing enormous harm. The same as a system. You cannot control a system in a kind of classical 20th century sense without drastically diminishing its flexibility and its ability to cooperate and so to perform. So what we're doing is, or what I do a lot, is to create impulses into the system to
Mm-hmm.
see how they self-regulate. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in coaching, you can give somebody an impulse and see how their psychology copes with it, and
Yeah.
then support them, provide the resources, develop the new models or the new way of looking at things to help them to deal with the new situation. And the same thing can be done with entire organizations. That
Mm-hmm.
you, instead of trying to steer them from above, you give them impulses from below or from the side, and you see what they do with that, and then you see where they're stuck or where they need resources, and you continue working with that. So it's very much a kind of a bottleneck oriented approach to the, a lot of the stuff that I learned when I was learning lean
Mm-hmm.
applies to transformation generally very well.
Yeah, I think that, can you take that a little bit further and give an example? Because I think that it's so important to say, okay, impulses coming from different areas of the organization to see how they respond. Um, yes, yes. If they're really going to change, how do they adapt and understand what these impulses can do? Can you give me an example of an impulse that you've done?
Sure. So I think one of the things that a lot of companies are striving for these days is a philosophical approach to business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Netflix puts it well, to create an organization of freedom and responsibility. The advantages are just huge, because if you have an organization where responsibility is a principle, then people are going to try and do the right thing
Mm-hmm.
based on the strategy and the objectives that the company has and the customer needs. Um, most companies don't trust their employees to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
so they have strong systems of control.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do is they pay a very high price for that control in the lack of trust and the amount of controlling in the negative sense that has to be done to make sure that everybody is following the rules that are being created from above.
Mm-hmm.
Now, rules are important. We need rules to keep things together. The question is, what is the philosophy in terms, the values in terms of which those rules are lived?
Mm-hmm.
So if you try to kind of announce a culture of freedom and responsibility from above, coming from a kind of a standard command and control organization, that's not going to work, because people won't understand it, and
You.
they won't believe you. That's the biggest one, right? Because their whole experience tells them that this is just some kind of, it's like, greenwashing for company values.
Yeah.
So, and top managers need to learn why this is all important and helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I think it's my experience of the way it works the best is to start small, and to
Mm-hmm.
start in those areas of the company where you have teams
Mm-hmm.
with customers, where this way of working, lots of freedom, lots of personal responsibility, flexible adaptive planning, where that would just generate immediate advantages, and
Mm-hmm.
where the people are already there. They've thought about this. They're bridling at the controls they're subjected to, and they could just work much, much better without them. So you can do a pilot team, and then what you can do is to build capacity in that team
Mm-hmm.
for these kinds of ideas and for the skills.
Mm-hmm.
And what inevitably happens is that at the interfaces, you have conflict, because if you've got a very dynamic team, which is working much faster and much closer with the customer than the support functions or the dependencies at the interfaces, then the difference in speed alone and the difference in expectations is going to cause problems. So the question that becomes, if the pilot team is really doing better,
Mm-hmm.
do the surrounding interfaces squash the initiative?
Yeah.
to return things to the old norm?
Mhm.
Or are they inspired and we kind of flip them to go along to integrate better with the team that's moving faster? Now, on an operational level, you can actually go quite far with that.
Mhm.
Because what happens is, I love the process where when a team's really doing well with freedom and responsibility, they'll often post their visualizations in a
Mhm.
project room. And others will hear about this
Yeah.
and they'll
Mhm.
start doing little pilgrimages
Yeah.
where individuals first, a little
Yeah.
trickle, and then entire teams and departments come over and say, can you show us how you're doing this? So what
Mhm.
you're doing is you're building internal competence.
Yeah.
Now, where the really critical um, interface happens is when this starts reaching the level of project management
Mhm.
or even higher, the level of company governance.
Yeah.
Because these dynamics do not dovetail well with classical top-down controlling.
Mhm.
So at that point, you have a hopefully productive conflict where upper management looks at this and the team says, look, we need your help.
Mhm.
Look at the great results we're getting, right? Look
Yeah.
how happy our customers are. Look how flexibly we're dealing with crises,
Yeah.
right? And it's working, we're proving
Mhm.
it.
Yep.
Now we need you guys to stop hindering us at certain points
Yeah.
and to change something in the controlling system, in the goal setting system, in the performance management system. So in all the systems that especially HR has to do with, but also finance.
Yep.
And we need you guys to give us the IT, the overall IT systems, the platforms that will allow us to scale this.
Mhm.
And that's where it gets really interesting because there is, I think, nothing more deeply ingrained in upper managers than this need for control.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, that's totally understandable because they're responsible.
Yeah. Rewards recognition systems rule.
It's their, I mean, if things go wrong, it's their heads that are on the chopping block,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
As one of
And
my old bosses used to say, who do I fire? He's like, okay, whose head do I cut? Who do I fire? And it was this looking for responsibility. I'm like, okay, maybe we need to like reframe that. It's not how we say that, but at the end of the day, it's that piece of what is the responsibility.
well, and especially the tougher guys who pride themselves on, tough and consequent decision making, they
Yeah,
will often speak exactly like that. But what
absolutely.
it does is it hampers them themselves.
Yeah.
So because what they're applying to others, they're also applying to themselves
Mm-hmm.
mentally in their own inner images of the way the world works. And now you've got this dynamic of freedom responsibility that's getting great results,
Mm-hmm.
and all their instincts just start, buzzing and going, oh, we're not so sure about this, right?
Yeah.
And that process is usually really slow
Mm-hmm.
because you don't, I mean, as an upper manager, you don't want to just let go and then have things crash.
Mm-hmm.
Because not only are you going to suffer from this, but your entire company, your shareholders, everybody's going to suffer, your customers.
Yeah.
So you want to do this carefully,
Mm-hmm.
but you want to do it to the
Exactly.
extent that it works, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the big question becomes, how do you manage that process? And that's where, I mean, shifting teams to agile work methods and getting the mindset going is not difficult because the people are usually there already, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in the leading teams.
Yeah.
But getting this to happen on a whole systems level is just, you know,
I
it's
couldn't agree.
it's the reason that a lot of legacy companies buy startups, because they say we can't do this internally. We have to buy this.
Yeah.
We have to bring this in.
Well, and I think it goes back to what you were talking about around the psychology and organizational development of what are fear-based responses of going outside of that comfort zone of where okay, in order to keep my job, in order to be doing what I believe I'm supposed to be doing or been rewarded and asked to do, I'm being asked to go into a different space where it's unsure, where the ambiguity, and how do I even push up against that wall of what the comfort zone is, even if I can see that okay, more innovation, more freedom, more engagement, more customer quality response, that these things are really good, but I'm still, trying to get out of okay, how do I go to the comfort zone? What are the behaviors I need to do in order to be able to manage, or, what is even my role as a manager within this new system? And am I relevant? And how do I learn these skills as to what my role is?
Yeah, yeah. So there's an interaction between context and behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first things that teams that start working in this freedom and responsibility philosophy need is they need a context. They need the environment, the resources, the processes, structures, everything that's involved in this.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that managers can learn is to build that context.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what the teams will do is that they will, in retrospectives, they will reflect on their impediments.
Yeah.
And the impediments can be behavioral, and that's stuff they can work on themselves. So how do we communicate? How do we deal with conflicts? But the impediments are mostly structural, organizational.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big impulse for organizational development, because what a team will do, there's no manager in the team anymore, right? The manager is there making sure the team has the good environment, but they're working autonomously.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll invite the manager to come and visit them every couple of weeks, or maybe every 6 weeks if they're doing the retrospectives. And they'll say, boss, we need you.
Yeah.
And what we need you for is to help us deal with these structural impediments at the interfaces with colleagues, politically, in terms of governance, in the performance management system.
Mm-hmm.
And could you help us here? And what they will have done is they'll have written tickets for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll take the Post-its, hopefully, and he'll put them in his own Kanban board, and he'll start working on them.
Yeah.
So what the manager's job becomes is, what the behavior he learns is not to try to manage the people.
Mm-hmm.
They're managing themselves.
Yep.
What he wants to do is to manage the environment, which enables the people to do their job with freedom and responsibility. And there's so much in typical corporate systems that works against that kind of culture.
Yeah.
That you can do culture workshops till you're blue in the face, as long as those structural impediments continue.
Yeah.
Nobody will believe you. It'll have no effect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So now we have managers who are taking responsibility for making sure their teams can do their jobs. And they need to be able to do two things. They need to work strategically.
Yeah.
And they should probably have some coaching skills.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of their people are not going to believe them, even if they do a great job.
Yeah.
As we know, we talked about. And so that, I think that's kind of the big transition to where the behaviors are. What you learn is when you are mistrustful as a manager, that has consequences. And when you start to create this space of self-responsible work, it becomes painfully obvious when you fall back into those kinds of beliefs and behaviors. People respond immediately because you've made the system transparent, and you will get feedback straight away.
Okay, very diplomatic way of saying that, Tom.
Yeah. You're preventing us from working, boss. Would you please do something else? Right? Although it can take a while until the teams have the courage and the environment is there for them to start talking to their bosses that way, because that kind of reverses the power relationship.
Well, and I think, as we look to the pieces around inclusion, equity, fairness, at the end of the day, it is that piece of how are we looking at each other at eye level and saying, how are we constructively trying to get something done, rather than looking at what our accoutrements or these other kind of power play systems are, and saying, okay, are they fit for purpose, and what are we actually trying to accomplish together?
Yeah.
And so it's that piece of the threat response to then also to say, okay, that's one way to do it, but the other piece is to say situation growth, and then how can we see our different roles that we play within that. Yeah, I love it. Well, let me take you through the last one thing. Obliquity. So we're just
Obliquity.
We're just coming off of Christmas. So one thing I want to talk to you is not about O Tannenbaum but to talk about, here as we look to what we're trying to achieve, how do you see that, and how do you approach that in your work?
Well, I guess one of the principles, again, one of the basic ideas about how you are successful, how you achieve results, I try to describe in terms of a basic life principle, and that is that anything that is really important in life, you cannot aim for directly.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're a man and you want love, and you go out into the world and you say to the world of women, love me, love me, love me, how will most women respond? They'll go, ew, get away, get away. Right? Nobody likes a needy
Isn't there an
lovesick
app for
person.
that?
And so what you have to do is you have to become lovable. And then there's a disconnect between what you're looking for and whether you'll get it, because you can't control it. So if you become lovable, somebody may decide they want to love you, right? But it's their choice. You can't force that.
Yeah.
If you want to become rich, then don't look at the money. Because if you go to the market and you kind of go, my goal is to be rich, give me money, you know, what will most customers do? They'll go, well, that's nice for you, but you know, we're not going to make you rich for no reason. Do something that's of value for us, and then we'll happily give you our money, right?
Yeah.
So again, there's a disconnect, and
Yeah.
the problem with most of the mental attempts at managing our lives and managing our business is that we try to do this directly. We try to make a cause and effect connection between the actions we take and the results that we get. Now, in a simple systems context, that works.
Yeah.
So if you're optimizing a production line and you're using Six Sigma, you have complete control over inputs, process outputs, and you even have control over what people do in the process. So with video analysis and poka-yokas and stuff like that, then cause and effect analysis and control works perfectly well. But we're moving into a VUCA world. We're in the VUCA world.
Yeah.
It's a complex world, and in
Yeah.
complexity, you don't have direct cause and effect relationships. You have correlations and interactions. And so what we need to do for everything, whether it's coaching or organizational development or, you know, satisfying customers in the market, is to think of actions to take which will, you know, get us in that direction.
Yeah.
But not to become reductive. Because the moment we become reductive and think we can master this, we can control this, we start dysfunction, and we ruin the space in which people can be free and responsible and creative and do good things, right?
Yeah.
And it's that disconnect, that understanding that in the world of complexity, you can give impulse, put impulse into the system. You can inspire, you can support, but you cannot determine.
Precisely.
Keeping that disconnect in mind and allowing it to be there is something that's very difficult for kind of the classical business mindset to bear.
Well, and I think that, you know, as we continue to move forward, you know, here the VUCA of, you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Here, as we go into more of a safety economy, we don't know, you know, yes, we are getting vaccines, you know, you and I may be getting ours in October in Germany. But as we look to, you know, here, how are organizations going to do in 2021? To say, okay, here, how are we adaptive? How are we responding to the different boundary conditions that our world is giving us? Where do you kind of see, and this is what do you kind of envision happening in 2021 as organizations begin to question more and more how they've functioned, and that the environment around the organizations has said, yeah, that was good for the 90s and the 2000s, but we need to do something different. Where do you see 2021 in terms of organizational transformation going?
Well, I think that the most obvious one that COVID has enabled is IT. So the whole notion of working online, working from home, flexible teams, I think, because it was the only way we could survive the last 10 months. I think anybody who argued this doesn't work, it can't work, it shouldn't work, has learned something. The second is that, especially with the Mittelstand, the German Mittelstand, they've always viewed IT as an expense and not as a strategic asset. And I think that has broken that view of the world. So they now are unbelievably thankful for Microsoft 365 environments.
Mhm.
where cloud computing was the devil's
Mhm.
work, a year ago, right?
Essentially, yeah.
And there's still a lot of skepticism about it,
Mhm.
and there are good IT security reasons to be careful about these
Yeah.
things. At the same time, we can't afford not to move forward very quickly on this.
Yeah.
And having a good IT platform
Mm.
has implications for everything else you do, because you've now got an information space
Mhm.
where you need HR rules and regulations and finance rules and regulations that will allow you to use it.
Mhm.
So the easy one was, okay, now we have video conferencing equipment, and we're using Cisco systems, for example, WebExes. But
My
there's no
brother-in-law will be happy that you plugged that. Sorry.
what? Sorry.
My brother-in-law worked for Cisco.
Oh, okay. But now you need HR regulations for mobile work.
Mhm.
And there are all
Yeah.
kinds of things that you have to coordinate with the works councils and their skepticism as well about how this can be
Mhm.
abused. But the process has started. So I think we're moving down that road quite
Yeah.
quickly.
Yep.
And the whole notion of self-responsible work, I think, has gotten a
Very.
huge leg
Yes.
up,
Totally agree.
because that's the only way it's going to work. Right? You
Mhm.
cannot. We've known for decades that you cannot control knowledge workers the way you can control
Absolutely.
line
Yep.
assembly workers.
Yep. That's what I said.
It's all happening in the person's head, and he's driving to work and he's working for you because he's thinking about his job,
Yeah.
or he's talking to friends who are engineers and they're having a discussion at their barbecue where the rest of the family is kind of going, "Oh God, do you have to?" But they're working
And
for us.
yeah, absolutely. And we know that the most inspired ideas usually happen in the shower when you're distracted and you're not sitting in front of the problem. So you're absolutely correct. The piece around self-responsibility and understanding, we need to go away from the idea that a time card regulates how work gets done.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, and there's a great example of the way not accepting the obliquity principle can work against you, because
Mhm.
what happens is when you maintain time cards for knowledge workers, what they do is they become disincentivized. They
Yep.
start focusing on doing their work to the last minute, and
Mhm.
then stamping their time card, and then the mindset becomes one of, if they treat me this way, I'll treat them that way as well.
Yeah.
So instead of being creative at home or as I travel, I'm going to really try to practice to leave my work at work and not think about this when I leave. And that's the consequence of that kind of compartmentalized way of working with people. And it's a shame. It's such a shame.
It's such a shame. Daniel Pink, when was that? In 90s, this whole piece about how are we looking at autonomy, purpose, and mastery.
Yeah.
And are you doing something out of the intrinsic motivation around that self-responsibility, or does the extrinsic become larger? And as we look to the complex problems, yeah. So how are we incentivizing seeing people as real people as we continue to transform in 2021, and using enabling systems to help that flexible collaboration?
Mm. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Tom. This has been an absolutely excellent dive into how the principles behind what we're doing are really the foundation of good organizational transformation, and that continues to go forward. If someone would like to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you, dear Tom?
They can mail me at mail@tomklein.de, or they can visit my website at tomklein.de. And I'm always happy to talk to new people and listen to the things they're working on. So thank you, Elizabeth. As always, it's light and a joy to talk to you.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so glad that you are in my world. I am so glad that you are in our circle.
Thank you for inviting me.
Bada bing, bada bang. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Visit us on rcircle.co, and we will be continuing with these our talks too. If there's something else that you would like to hear us talk to and dive deeper in, please leave a comment, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. All right. This is Liz Lembke, over and out. we know that the most inspired ideas usually happen in the shower.